Hi everyone, welcome to this book discussion on Re-Imagining Sociology in India, Feminist Perspectives, edited by Gita Chadha and M.T. Joseph, which was published by Routledge in 2020. We have both the editors with us here today, and I'm going to briefly introduce each one of them. Dr. Gita Chadha is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai, India. Her areas of academic interest include sociological theory, feminist science studies, sociology of knowledge, intersectional feminist epistemologies, and visual cultures. She has designed and taught the first feminist science studies course in India at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TISS Mumbai. She has developed frameworks for feminist archiving at the Research Center for Women's Studies, SNDT Women's University, and has designed interdisciplinary pedagogic initiatives for integrating science and social science teaching. M.T. Joseph is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai, India. His fields of interest include sociology of religion, critical religious studies, cultural anthropology, political sociology, post-colonial studies, Dalit studies, and masculinities. He is also a member of the faculty at the Institute of Indian Culture, Mumbai, a postgraduate research center in sociology and anthropology recognized by the University of Mumbai. I welcome you both and thank you so much for taking time out to do this discussion with us.
Thank you, Rituparna and Dipali, and doing sociology for helping us uh, reach out with our book to the sociological community. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Dr. Chadda, for the kind words. And let me begin by asking you a little about the genesis of the book. You do speak a great deal about the Department of Sociology in the University of Mumbai, which is also the oldest in Asia and the one where both of you are located. So, if you could talk a little bit about the inception of the book.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question because genesis of books are important. So, I joined the Bombay University department as a faculty member in 2013, and Joseph was already there from 2012 onwards, I think. And by the time I was a committed feminist and a committed sociologist also. So when the opportunity came to me to organize a seminar immediately after I joined, it became very natural and organic for me to try and bring these two conversations together. And there were, Sharmila had already written extensively, and we were hoping to have Sharmila come for the keynote address. But she passed away in July of that year, and we missed her sorely. And if you notice, our volume is dedicated to her memory also. Yeah. So 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 that really was the impulse to organizing this seminar, which was called Genders, Feminisms, and Sociologies Towards a State of Alteredness. And as we reached out to various women in sociology, various feminist women in sociology, I was quite overwhelmed with the response, which was that, yeah, there is a need for something like this, to mark the missing revolution, so to speak, in the Indian sociological community. And it was quite a productive seminar, which led to the special issue of Contributions to Indian Sociology, which I edited, which was the 50th issue actually. And it was a special issue on the theme of this seminar, and we had 7 essays there. Uh, Important ones, Kamala Ganesh wrote, Sujata Patel wrote, Maitreyi Chaudhary wrote, Padma Velaskar wrote, Aparna Rai Parol wrote, and Mayuri Sonam code for that. Uh, yeah. So I was saying that we were met with a very positive response in organizing the seminar, and it led to the contributions issue. And then, since there were so many other contributions also that had come during the seminar, we thought that we would also produce a book through that seminar, and Joseph and I decided to do that. The department is an alma mater. It's my alma mater. I did my master's in the 80s, early 80s of Mumbai in the department, and I have extremely fond memories of the department, where it was a department which was emphasizing on a lot of empirical work. But then we also had, Manorma Savur, for example, who was a Marxist sociologist. We had Dr. Narayan, who brought in phenomenological perspectives. So we had an interesting mix and an interesting mix of exposure to different paradigms in sociology. I remember my early interest in sociology of science and knowledge developed there with Professor Radhika Ramasubban, who taught us a paper on sociology of science. My interest in sociology of religion and sociology of art couldn't really take off from there, because we had very well designed papers in the syllabus, but we didn't have anybody to teach them. So that was the interesting dynamics over there. And so I think when I joined the department as a faculty member, I soon realized that I was probably in a 100-year-old department. I was probably the 10th, was it Joseph, or 11th woman in the history of the department to have joined. So that was quite a striking feature, that, that in 100 years I was, the 10th. So we started looking at the history of the department. We started looking at the trajectories of how gender had come in into the discourse, and we realized that Kamala Ganesh, who was going to retire at that time, was probably one of the first people in the department who named feminism as a perspective in sociology. So the book is also dedicated to her. So really, that is what led to this volume, and I'll let Joseph talk a little more about the department, because it's also his alma mater.
Yeah, taking off the thread from Gita, I did my master's in University of Mumbai in '96, and that's the first time I got introduced to critical approaches to society, the nuances of critical caste studies, specifically from Ramesh Kamble, Professor S.M. Michael, P.G. Jogdan, and others at that particular time. And it opened up a vista of knowledge production, of critiquing, epistemologies from below. And it was quite new to me. And I slowly began a kind of a liking for that kind of a critical consciousness, and which I carried on for my MPhil and PhD, which I did in Delhi University, Delhi School of Economics, under the mentorship of Professor Virginius Kapha, where I studied the Neo-Buddhist Navayana Buddhism with fieldwork in Ambedkar Nagar in Aurangabad. So I had that kind of a critical consciousness that I picked up during my master's and MPhil and PhD. And then in 2008, I started teaching in St. Andrews College, and I was given a paper, Gender and Society, for the first time. And I had not actually given any thought to feminist consciousness or gender studies, though Professor Kamala Ganesh was my teacher. I took a course in Indian anthropology with her, but her idea of feminism never rubbed on me at all. I was completely blind to it. So it is when St. Andrews, I had to teach the course, and I started reading for the course. I got into the nuances of feminist consciousness, and then it made sense to me, a question that Professor Rajini Palriwala asked me during my Viva, PhD Viva, along with Rowena Robinson, that your entire PhD dissertation does not have any feminist, gender lens. And at that time, I did not understand the implications of what they meant by gender lens. And I slowly began, getting into that kind of feminist consciousness when I started teaching that paper, and later when I came into the department, and we got aligned with faculty like Gita and others with that kind of a consciousness. And that is where I locate myself into this project. And in continuation of the critical pedagogy that is part of what we actually call the Bombay School of Sociology. So that is where the book also has connection, along with the twin dedications that we have in the book, both to Professor Sharmila Rage and to Professor Kamala Ganesh.
Right. Thank you for that response, Dr. Chadda and Dr. Joseph. You've talked about the department and the genesis of the book. Now, coming to the question of women in sociology, which is the book about. So how do you look at this question of women in sociology? And Dr. Chadda, you in particular have worked on women in science. So do you see any similarities or differences there?
Yeah, thanks, Dipali, for that question. The question of women in sociology is a complex one, right? I mean, the discipline has been feminized to a very large extent, because it's considered to be a soft discipline. It's considered to have dealt largely with questions of tradition and, family, marriage, all of that. And also because of the fact that it's not, though our department was very heavy on empiricism, it's still not, as we all know, in the positivist paradigm on which the social sciences are placed. It's still considered to be a soft science, and in that sense you find a lot of women coming into the field. Yeah, you kind of find many students. There are many more women students than there are men students. In the undergraduate level, in the city levels, there are many more women teaching the discipline also. So it's interesting how there is a larger presence of women in sociology and in anthropology. We realize that this doesn't necessarily make them visible. Yeah, so the contribution of women sociologists to the discipline is not as visibilized as it must be. So one of the things that we try to do, therefore, is to try and most feminist enterprises are like that, say even in science, for example, is to retrieve the early women. I don't like the word foremothers, but the early women in the discipline. And Kamala had undertaken that work already to a very large extent, looking at the work of Iravati Karve, looking at the work of Chandrakala Hate, Parvatama, which she has spoken about also. So when we thought that we should look at the work of the early women in sociology, a lot of our concerns were about how to do this. Are we how do we read feminism in their work? And in trying to do that, are we creating a certain kind of an academic fiction? Yeah, in trying to read feminism into the works of these women, if they're, when probably it was not as obvious as it is in some of our work today. So that was our major challenge in that sense. And yes, there is a similarity between the way women in science and women in sociology position themselves, because a lot of women in science shy away from calling themselves women scientists, and even more difficult is it to accept the tag of a feminist scientist. And the worry is that if they call themselves women scientists, they will get ghettoized, which is what happens. If they call themselves feminist scientists, it gets worse. They get stigmatized. Yeah. So I think women in sociology also have faced that challenge. How do we, use the prefix of feminist, or what are the challenges and what are the problems with it? How do we as women sociologists not get pushed into doing only studies on women and gender and family and marriage? How do we stake our claims for being sociologists, or for being engaged, say, with theory, with methodology and all of that? So I think the dilemma is very intense amongst women in sociology also, whether to call themselves feminist or not. So this has been quite a challenge, and so you see those women in sociology who would prefer not to call themselves feminist, and there are those who have become comfortable with using it not only as an identity but as a practice, as a methodological position also. So yeah, the question of women in sociology is a complex one, and like in women in science, similarly in women in sociology, my question and all our question collectively has been that just by bringing more women uh, into the domain, uh, it doesn't necessarily result in a feminist consciousness, and yet we need to protect the right of women to come into science, and also protect the and also visibilize the women who are there, and engage with the kind of experiences that they go through. Yeah. So yeah, Joseph.
Yeah, to add something of the idea from that I have on this. Yeah, Gita talked about the image of a soft discipline, obviously, which attracted many women as students in the sociology classrooms. That did not mean that there were women teachers in equal in number or more in number than men across sociology classrooms in India. Number one. Number two, I remember when I was doing masters, there was this image of women, certain women-centric kind of subdisciplines where women went, like gender and society, family, marriage and kinship, all of those papers. And it was kind of a ghettoization of the women's issues into those classrooms, and men hardly chose those topics. And women taught those topics. Yeah. So, and then you see a shift over a period of time where there are women sociologists teaching theory, teaching other kind of domains. That is one thing. But secondly, also something that I pick up from the book in the chapter from Leena Pujari, where she talks about certain ways in which the content and the syllabus and all of that is devised in certain functionalist standardized format, and where sociology teaching becomes a kind of a following of that format, and thereby how critical pedagogy becomes difficult for a lot of people, and how that kind of a breakthrough has also been made by certain feminist women sociologists with feminist consciousness. And I think, books by Abbott and Wallace and a couple of other volumes of that kind have broken new ground and made those spaces where today, for instance, sociology and subdisciplines are not anymore ghettos. Okay, men teach feminist-oriented topics, and women teach topics and subdisciplines which were the kind of larger forte of men. I mean, that is there. But so some of the kind of ways in which I also noticed that, to use an adage that Babasaheb Ambedkar used for Marxists in the 1930s, I mean, Brahmin Boys Club kind of a thing, that is, there are certain areas still in sociological kind of official, official kind of, what I can say, associations in India, which are still little bit of male bastions. And I have seen it in operation in certain informal ways. And I think that is where this book breaks new ground in all of this. In addition to our section on early women sociologists, where we do that kind of an archival work. And that analysis is brilliantly done by Professor Kamala Ganesh in the first chapter.
Right. So our next question is sort of connected to this. It is on the question of early women in sociology, and Professor Kamala Ganesh refers to them as incipient feminists. So how does your book address this issue?
Yeah, so as I said, Rituparna, it's very difficult to, you know, call the early women feminists, because this kind of very defined theoretical perspective, this very defined paradigm of feminism didn't exist in that sense. But a lot of work that the early women did, came from very central lived experiences of being a woman in a patriarchal society. So the kind of things that they tended to pick up, or the kind of things that they tended to address, did come from those locations, which is also the way it is even today, right? So in that sense, they come from a location of being a woman, and then they have to embody or inhabit this academic space where you have to strip off gender, you have to strip off caste, and you have to be this objective sociologist, right? So what we sort of gleaned or understood, or what we analyze when we analyze their works and their work and their lives, we realize that in trying to fit into this discipline, which was largely a very not only male dominated, but it was very masculine in the way it was cast. Yeah. So in that sense, their efforts to fit in often failed, and they succeeded when they could adopt the existing paradigms. And if they could successfully adopt those, which they found very difficult to do, then they would be successful. Yeah. And if not, we found a very interesting sort of, at least phenomenon, which is that, so we look at Chandrakala Harte's biography. What Chandrakala Harte did was set up Kutumba Sakhi, along with being a practicing sociologist. She set up Kutumba Sakhi, which was a self-help group of women, and in the city of Bombay, it still exists. Yeah. So this was done out of a lot of voluntary work. So I make the case here about how do we look at this kind of voluntarism? How do we look at this kind of voluntary work that they were, thinking of as social work, and how does it impact today on a more praxis-based or more applied kind of sociology that we are all looking to make. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that kind of work that, for example, Chandrakala Harte did is central for us to understand how sociology could be reimagined. So, for example, I mean, we call this the outside of sociology, right? So the work that they did outside of sociology today has become an inside way of doing sociology. So in that sense, they were forerunners of this kind of work. If you look at Iravati Karve, for example, in the kind of writing, so if you look at academic writing and you look at Iravati Karve's Yugant, now Yugant was a very interesting way in which she reinterpreted the epic of Mahabharata, and she used a semi-fictional style, historical semi-fictional style, which was again outside of sociology. It was not the kind of writing that was permitted within sociology. And today, with the kind of blurring that is happening in ethnographic writing, in the kind of disciplinary conversations that we are having, say, between literature and anthropology, it was almost like she had done something already of this kind. Yeah. So, and then you look at, and then look at Parvatama, for example, and her Dalit identity and how she negotiated it, how she navigated it. And today, how do we revisit it? So when I think of how Parvatama might have been today, should have probably been one of the most strident Dalit feminist sociologists that we would have found. But at the time that she was dealing with the question of caste within sociology, her own Dalit identity, there was a complexity. There was a need to sort of not speak about it because it was not probably considered to be an objective location to speak from. So as a discipline has grown, I think we have started doing these things very differently with standpoint epistemologies. It's not anymore only about Marx and class perspective. We are speaking about Ambedkarite perspectives and standpoints from class, caste and race. We are talking about feminist standpoint epistemologies in sociology from the point of view of gender. Most importantly, we are speaking about intersectionality, which is what Sharmila, did wonderfully. Yeah. And so when we look at the works of Parvatama, I would argue saying that you can read an early intersectionality approach, not as well articulated as you see in present and contemporary times. So I'd say that reading these early works of women in sociology allows us to make some sort of I one of the remarks that we got when the book was being reviewed is, oh, what is the contribution of these early women? There's no legacy here. And that's when I started thinking about the question of, is there a legacy? Do we really want a legacy? Or are we just looking for ways of doing sociology which were not marked because they were being done by women? Yeah. So I don't know what Joseph has to add about this early women in sociology question.
Yeah, I think that question has a lot to do with paradigm, as you talked about. Every discipline has its own canons, and the canons of sociology were very clearly defined by the time these early women came into sociology, and therefore to get that kind of a respectability as teachers of sociology in the field of sociology, they had to fit into those canons at that level. So that was there. That's one thing. And the other one is that feminism as a consciousness, as a label, is something that developed very clearly since the 70s. And we are trying to apply that to women who were before that. These two issues are there. But when we look at the analysis in the book itself, or whether of Leela Dubey or Neera Desai, C. Parvatama, and Ratna Naidu, which is there, all of four, and others like Chandrakala Hate that Gita mentioned, you see there are distinct stamp of their scholarship. Whether they call themselves feminists is a different question. And also this, the word that Professor Kamala Ganesh uses, incipient feminist, she has a question mark after that. Okay, it's not she's not just calling them incipient feminists. There's a question mark, and I think our that first section of the book is in some ways answering that question mark.
Yeah, and I sort of hope that slowly and very surely we will bring these women into courses in feminist sociology or general sociology and be able to teach them, because for example, we globally we've begun teaching somebody like Harriet Martineau, but we are not necessarily teaching a Chandrakala Hate or a Ratna Naidu in terms of the kind of work that they did. Yeah, even if it might not be the grand systemic big theoretical work that the men were doing at that time, I think it's very important for us to bring them into the pedagogic spaces.
So you do briefly refer to legacy and the making of it, but you also problematize this issue. So why do you think this is important?
Yeah, so Rituparna, the question we need to ask ourselves is who gets to make a legacy, and I can see Joseph is smiling. Who gets to make a legacy, right? In a patriarchal society that we live in patriarchal cultures that we live in, who leaves behind important work is obvious. The obvious answer is that it's not women, right? Because people who are inside a space are the ones who leave the legacy generally. So the experience of women is largely that they are not, as Joseph said, part of the boys' clubs, right? So how do they then make legacies? How do they then get to make schools, right? So I've in the introduction I've used Dhanagare's classification of how schools get formed, and obviously obviously we would want a school of feminist sociology, maybe established in the Department of Bombay, Department of Delhi, Department of Lucknow, wherever it can be. But the question is that this legacy making is ridden with difficulties, because I would rather argue saying that it is an extremely the lineage is trace through notions of purity, notions of who gets to do what, of very strict boundaries that are maintained. Yeah. And so I think there is a problem with this idea of legacy, and the problem of academic legacies basically leads to making of gated universes. So I be more comfortable saying that when we are retrieving the voices of women in sociology, or when we are collecting contemporary voices of women in sociology, our attempt should not be to make a legacy. Our attempt should be to make a collective. And see, in the world of in our movements, in the women's movements, we work with collectives. So I think similarly within the academia, I think it's better to work with the idea of feminist collectives rather than talking about feminist legacies. So I think really that is what I'd like to say. Sharmila produced a legacy? Do we want to produce a legacy around Sharmila's work? I am not quite sure. I'd rather use something less patriarchal conceptually itself. Joseph, what do you think?
Yeah. For me, when we talk about legacy, it also goes back to this, our habit of naming fathers,
Yeah.
father of Indian nation, father of sociology. And I have never come across mothers, number one. And all of these fathers, as if, they produced all of these things by themselves. And they would have collaborators who are women. Their names are not there. Their work, their identities are all erased.
Absolutely.
It's all fathers. So the word legacy is very loaded in terms of patriarchal kind of normalized kind of structures of epistemology, and therefore, and that is one of the reasons why we interrogate that word. Professor Kamala Ganesh also has interrogated that in her piece, and therefore we also, when we look at the work of people like Sharmila Rage, they are collectives. They are kind of innovative pedagogies, innovative ways of making new imagined collectives, and therefore you cannot. It would be from a very feminist kind of a consciousness, it would be amiss to call it a legacy and attribute it to one person. In some ways, that is tantamount to, creating alternatives to the father of sociology kind of visions. So that is so. Now, obviously, we have got used to the word collective. We have so many collectives all over. There was a time this word was foreign to us, and therefore that is the direction in which we are taking the issue forward by contesting the idea of a legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just little more, it's little more equal. The idea of the collective, where you can sort of become free of hierarchies. So I think that's probably the excitement of talking about feminist collectives within the academia.
Right. So just taking cue from that, Dr. Joseph, my next question is addressed to you. How do you see yourself in this project of building a feminist sociology? Is it possible for a man to be a feminist would be the larger discussion, right?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. Yeah, I mentioned about feminist consciousness. And I would submit that feminist consciousness is a process in the life of anyone, whatever our genders or sexualities are. And my understanding of feminism is about an interface between equality and difference, and the manner in which it combines the private and the public and all of that. Now, I would say it has got a twin kind of an edge. Just like when we talk about Dalit consciousness. On the one, it has recourse to certain universal principles of egalitarianism, equality, and all of that. But at the same time, it has got also certain lived experience coming from being a woman, being, for instance, Dalit consciousness, being a Dalit. Now, the experience of being a Dalit is something that a non-Dalit can never get into. You can empathize, there's a limit to it. In the same way, being a woman in a very culturally specific setting which is sanctioned by patriarchy, is a very unique experience which a man would never be able to get into that. That is my submission. So to some extent, can a man be a feminist? Yes. When feminist consciousness refers to ideas of interface between, as I said, difference and sameness, equality and other issues, and it talks about the universal principles and all of that. But there is a specific way where the lived experience of being a woman has something very specific to contribute to that content of feminist consciousness, which I would say men would not be in a position to lay claim to. So, and I would say if men lay claim to that, it would amount to what Rebecca Solnit would say. Mansplaining things. So that's the way I locate myself. Am I a feminist? Yes. Can a man be a feminist in the way a woman is? No. That's my answer to that.
Thank you for that very interesting response.
Yeah,
And
I'm going to.
yeah.
I'm going to add to that, Rituparna, is, I want to talk about this a little bit actually, because see, let me sort of, start with an anecdote, okay, that happened in the department somewhere a few years after I joined and Joseph was already there. And like Joseph was saying, we had a lot of colleagues who were bringing in a critical Dalit consciousness into the discipline, into the classroom, into the pedagogy, into the culture of the department. And when it came to designing and teaching a paper in contemporary feminist theory, which is what I was doing, I had a strong section on intersectionality where I wanted to engage with Dalit feminism as much as I did with Black feminism, and my Savarna identity did come into question. That would a Dalit male professor be a better candidate for teaching Dalit feminism than a Savarna woman like me? And this led to a lot of questioning and a lot of agony, as far as I was concerned, on large epistemological questions as to who can speak for whom and what are the grounds on which we speak on. I remember sharing this informally with one of my senior students, and I remember them telling me that, but isn't it also, would you allow, for example, and I'll be very pointed here, would you allow, for example, Joseph Sir to teach feminism? This was early on when we joined. And I was struck by the question first. And I said, firstly, we are not here to allow anything, but it made me ponder and think about the conditions which make anyone a feminist, right? We all know that all women are not feminists, right? Some are, some aren't. And so therefore we know that it's a matter of consciousness. It's a matter of your lived experience, but it's also what you do with it, right? So I was forced to dwell on this question as to, if I were to dialogue with Joseph, which is what we did later on, what would be the ways in which to enter feminism for him? And I'm of the firm opinion, and that's why we have a very strong section in masculinity in the book, if you notice, that my position on this would be very simple, that if men, they are in a position of power, some men more than other men, if men can look at gender and patriarchy from their own positions more critically, as both from a position of privilege, but also as probably also victim of the same ideology, right? The dehumanizing of men that happens in patriarchy and in the kind of gender regime that we live in, is something which is shrinking their complete human potential also. So if it bothers them and they are upset about what it does to their human potential, that would be a better way to begin becoming a feminist. Because then you question, as Seidler would say, you question the gender ideology from your own lived experience of being a man and what power and privilege can do to you. Yeah, that becomes a better way of entering it. And if you notice in both the essays, Vishal Jadhav's essay and in Pushpesh Kumar's essay, there are two different positions that are coming through. Vishal is arguing, saying that feminists have ignored the question of masculinity. And there seems to be a little bit of a, anger there. Whereas Pushpesh comes from the position where he says feminism gave him the critical apparatus, or to examine, for example, the Kothis and subaltern masculinities, yeah, or marginalized masculinities. And he recognizes or positions himself as an ally, right, of the feminist project, very much like the way Joseph has just spoken about it. Yeah. So I think it is very, very possible for men to be feminists, but not in this patronizing manner that, we will help women to, the social reform idea. Because women's movement has proved that, women can fight their battles. Yeah, we need our allies, we need our friends, we need our comrades, right? So in that sense, I think it's important for us to look at masculinity, social construction of masculinity, and start engaging with it within our feminisms. And I think that would probably bring men to question gender ideologies also. No, Joseph, what do you say?
Yeah, definitely. One of the ways in which in addition to what I already said about men as feminists, is the way, like the more you read feminism, the more you read feminist consciousness, it's a reflexive experience to any man, because then you actually try to question the discourses on masculinity. It is not just a theoretical exercise. It becomes personal. It becomes your lived experience. You actually get an apparatus. You get a kind of a discourse and a language to analyze what it means to be a man, and how have you grown into that kind of a mold, and what is wrong with that mold, and how that mold is something that does harm and violence, and affect bodies and personalities and structures in certain ways. And you become aware of how complicit you are into that project, so that is with masculinities. Pushpesh Kumar's work is very, very interesting, where he, he acknowledges the way that feminism has given a start to analyzing multiple genders and sexualities, and then he actually shows a way ahead, a way forward, and even nailing certain ways in which certain feminist circles have not sufficiently addressed the issues of vulnerable masculinities and things like that. That's there. And Vishal's work is in the book looking at the colonial project. So that is interesting in that book. The idea of the masculine Maratha, that was a colonial project, and how the colonial subjects actually were formed into that kind of a mold. So the book has both of these articles on masculinity, but for me personally, it is more about also a reflexive take on how feminism gives you a reflexive kind of an access and a language and a possibility to imagine the ways in which masculinities are constructed, and therefore imagine new ways of being human, new ways of being alive. Yeah.
Because we are talking about this, so I should also ask you, what would be some of the main characteristics of a feminist sociology that, we practice?
Very simply speaking, first principle is that it's a praxis, right? A feminist sociology is a sociology that comes from women and men's grounded experiences of the world, lived experiences. So in that sense, I would say that a feminist sociology is grounded in a praxis. Secondly, the methodological principles that a feminist sociology would offer us are basically to look at the idea of a standpoint epistemology, right? To try and see knowledge as being constructed from marginal standpoints, and the politics of pushing the politics of giving these standpoints epistemic validity. Yeah. So in that sense, feminist sociology is deeply engaged with the standpoint. Yeah. In contemporary feminist sociologies, I'd say we cannot, obviously, we've organically arrived at the question of intersectionality, right? That any feminist attempt today cannot turn away from the fact that woman is not a stable category, it's not a singular category, that neither is men. So how it gets combined with caste in India, it gets combined with a class, it gets combined with religion, sexuality. So a feminist sociology by by definition should become much more intersectional. And for that to happen, I think it's important for us to become more and more reflexivity, the principle of reflexivity, which would require the sociologist, the ethnographer, the researcher to write themselves into the work that they are doing, that their own social class, their own social location, whether it is from a privileged position of questioning that privilege, or whether it is from a marginal location of bringing that marginality on the fore. I think the question of reflexivity is crucial. So I personally think that apart from it being grounded in the basic idea of praxis, feminisms, feminist theories are pegged on the ideas of standpoint epistemology, intersectionality, and reflexivity. And once we learn to do our research and our writing from using these principles, I think we'd be able to do what I term as feminist sociology. So does that necessarily mean that we are looking at gender alone? No. I'd argue saying no. You could be looking at the state. You could be providing a theory of the market. Yeah. So you don't have to be restricted to looking only at the questions of women or only at the question of gender. But these methodological principles can be extended to a wide range of substantive fields, I'd say. So, yeah. So to be able to question your own privilege as a researcher and an ethnographer, if you're in a privileged position, is crucial. And to be able to bring in your marginal locations for a transformative project is also very characteristic of a feminist sociology.
To add to that, I would say two things. One is, I would say the old idiom of feminist politics, that the personalist politics is still very relevant for feminist sociology, because that is one of the ways in which certain areas of human experience were excluded from knowledge production. And therefore, that project still is very relevant for and very active for feminist sociology, which needs to be a lot experience-based. And it brings that very clear difference to the fore. Secondly, I would say, for me, practicing feminist sociology, if I would need to just put it in one word, it is like an attempt to pluralize any homogenizing ideologies and identities. And for me, that is how to actually practice feminist sociology, which also would apply to genders, pluralize it, which is binaries or homogenized. Any attempt at homogenization, you pluralize it. I think it's a larger feminist agenda.
Right. So lastly, you place a great deal of emphasis on pedagogy. And Dr. Chadha, you have said that often the classroom is a site for critical transformation and transgression. What do you exactly mean by that?
So yeah, Rituparna, both of us, both Joseph and I, are what I would say, passionate pedagogues. Yeah, drawing from the idea of Dubois, which also Regid draws upon. So we're sort of placing ourselves in the kind of conversations that have been built by, say, Maitri Chaudhary, Avijit Pathak, where we are trying to understand that the discipline of sociology, or any discipline per se, grows with its how you teach it. Yeah. And in India, what has happened, particularly in my own work in the scientific institution, what you see is that there are the elite scientific research institutions, and then there are the universities where the teaching happens. Yeah. So this kind of schizophrenic divide uh, in the academic impulse, in the academic enterprise, has been a major problem in how the way we practice do our academics. So for, I think Joseph would agree, and for me particularly, research and teaching, as Maitreyi says, are part of the same fold, right? And if we don't look at the pedagogy of the discipline, we do a disservice to it. Yeah. So, and I think I've also talked about in the contributions introduction about how the discipline is, our discipline is continuously in a crisis. Yeah. And I feel one of the ways or sites in which that crisis gets spoken about, articulated, probably even resolved at times, is in the pedagogic space. What we do is taking off from our own experiences of being teachers, but also from the way Maitreyi talks about it, that how do we look at the whole question of education and pedagogy from below, from the classroom, yeah, from the classroom experiences, yeah. And we've sort of flagged out in the book three sort of important contours of feminist pedagogies or sociological pedagogies which align themselves with feminist pedagogies. Yeah. Is to talk about, first we speak about how the classroom or the principles of feminist pedagogy always are a combination of critique and care. That, it's with the critique of the discipline, its canon, its theoretical frameworks, and using our own lived experiences, our own movements to critique the discipline is one very important thing that we need to do in the classroom. For that, we need to transgress. Yeah, very, very often we need to transgress the kind of canonical dictums that we hear. And coming from the lived experience of us as women, we also bring in principles of care in the classroom, because the classroom is aimed in many ways an attempt to draw out on or base us on lived experiences of your students, of yourself. So in many ways it is a sharing of experiential realities, and they have to be done with care. They have to be done hermeneutically. They have to be done without judgment. Yeah. So this ability to make the classroom a safe space and an intelligent space is one of the things that feminist pedagogies do. For me, it's also important to talk about. So there are three essays. We have a whole section actually on pedagogy in the book, you must have seen. There is, of course, Leena Pujari's essay, which Joseph has already referred to. There is a very important essay by Anurekha Charibag also on the idea of mentoring. And when we were doing this conference and I invited her to talk about pedagogy, she said, what about mentoring? And I was, I thought it was a very Western concept. And this is very, very, very common in the world of science, that, you have to mentor. Anyway, so she said, I would like to write something on mentoring. And she wrote about a moment which I mark even in the introduction in the Department of Sociology in Pune, where Sharmila moved from sociology into women's studies, and how that created the kind of tension that we see defining women's studies and sociology, the relationship between these two even today. Yeah. So what is it, Anurekha asks, in sociological mentoring, okay, which we need to rethink from a feminist perspective? Yeah, bringing us back to the whole question of legacy and gated universities and the Brahmins boys club and all of that. Yeah, so how do we mentor? How do we mentor to build rather than a mentor to compete? Yeah, rather than mentor to ace it and scale it, but how do we mentor to care? Yeah, but my actual favorite essay in that section is an essay written by two of our department students, Ria De Silva and Ashika Bhargava, who were both doing the MPhil at that time. And they came with very, very interesting understandings of both these classrooms. Ashika was coming from a women's studies classroom into a sociology classroom, and Ria was coming from a sociology classroom into a women's studies space. And they both speak very interestingly about how these spaces have shaped their own feminisms and their own understanding of pedagogy. Yeah, and the impatience that Ria feels or shares her experience about the impatience with the feminist classroom as being something which is a sharing of sob stories, and there being no theory there, and how then it becomes very important for us to understand that this experience sharing of lived experience should not just remain there. How do we make it the basis of theoretical and epistemological reflections? And in other ways, Ashika speaks about her experiences of the feminist classroom, which was much more engaged and passionate and conversational, as opposed to the sociology classroom, which becomes very objective and sane and sanitized and clean and all of that. How we need to mess up that space also. So yeah, I basically feel that the kind of if we abide by the principles, or if we apply, or if we use and deploy the principles of what we know as feminist pedagogy, I think for me what has been most fulfilling has been the space of warmth, a pedagogic warmth that you can generate, which I think is very conducive to the expansion of the mind and the self.
Yeah, I would also consider pedagogy as very central to feminist sociology, because taking off from the 3 chapters in the book that Gita already mentioned, they try to engage with how feminist pedagogy is addressing the issues of power. Because in terms of syllabus making, in terms of content of what is being taught, how it is being taught, it is all invested with a lot of power relations. And how do you make a distinction? How do you make a difference with a feminist consciousness? So you see that quoting from bell hooks, teaching to transgress, both Anurekha Chariwag and Leena Pujari, both Anuragha Chariwag in terms of the mentor-mentee relationship and its power dynamics, and how a feminist pedagogy interrogates that and makes certain differences, makes certain conversations around it. And Leena Pujari in undergraduate classroom in a college in Mumbai University, how she and others of her have actually tried to engage in certain interrogations in regard to syllabus making and all of that, and how new practices and newer ways of teaching and engaging in sociology have come in. And also the chapter that Gita mentioned about Ashika and Ria, where they talked about as students, how they have been influenced by the construction of the feminist classroom. So all of these 3 are about interrogating power relations that are so much ingrained into classroom, ingrained into mentor-mentee relationships and other pedagogic exercises.
Yeah, I mean, if I may just also add, see, we draw also upon, say, what Sharmila had put forward as her own understanding experiences of feminist pedagogies, which are based on the idea of connectedness, that, the ideas of collaboration, the ideas of participation. Yeah. It's not that these ideas are new. I mean, we know that these ideas have existed in other critical pedagogies also. But I think what is unique about probably feminist pedagogies is this attempt to connect and to care while critiquing. So I think that's absolutely central to our practice and our craft.
Both of you are very passionate pedagogues, as we can gather. So, last question, do you have any advice for young teachers and educators like me and Dipali, or like many of them who are watching or listening to this video?
I was going to ask you, you tell us, how do you think of what we are saying?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some thoughts. We also did an interview with Dr. Chariwag on mentoring when her paper came out. And because both of us are teaching in public universities
Yeah.
now, this question of mentoring becomes very important, particularly considering the diverse nature of classrooms that one deals with.
Yes.
Dipali can talk more about Ranchi, but here in IP College, it's a very gendered experience because the students are all women. And, teaching certain papers actually opens up different sites of critical investigation that they probably don't otherwise do. And
Yes.
because, again, it's a college in a central university, the kind of diversity we have means that there are students from marginalized backgrounds who need a little extra push in many ways to be better included in what we do and the kind of things we do. There are very interesting papers in the sociology syllabi. For instance, there is a paper called Reading, Writing, and Reasoning in Sociology. It's a skill enhancement course, and teaching it is very interesting. But you can also notice the divide between people who have access to a certain kind of linguistic style compared to people who come from marginalized backgrounds. So, in such cases, as a pedagogue, it becomes very difficult to grade or mark because you know that there is a social context in which the writing or the reading is produced. At the same time, you also have to take into account who is putting in what kind of effort. So, what I have tried this time is have a more holistic approach and not look at only the written text that they submit, but also keep in mind their attendance, sincerity, the kind of confidence improvement that they are showing, so that it's more holistic. And Dipali can probably share a little bit as well.
My experiences here in Ranchi would be, I think, quite different from what Rituparna has shared. I mean, because like I have studied in Delhi, so I know what classrooms in Delhi look like and what Delhi University students would be like. Here in Ranchi, to begin with, I think majority of my students come from marginalized backgrounds. Here, I do have both men and like male students as well as female students. But the thing is, a lot of them, are also working while doing their masters here. So unless I take that into consideration, it is very difficult for me to again reach a point where I can actually, if I so I have to, like Ritupanna said, strike a balance between what I expect out of them and what they are giving in classroom. The other thing also is to just how sociology is taught or has been taught in a place like Jharkhand or the neighboring states from where the students come from. It's been very different. It has just been like, bookish knowledge. Also, students come from not all the students come from the English medium. So I have to actually teach bilingually, or if I teach something in English, I have to make an effort to, translate a text, maybe just using the Google Translator, but still provide them some material in Hindi. So that is the kind of effort that one has to make. But yes, I think I agree with Rituparna, where one tries to make students speak in class, because often when they write, the answers are not quote unquote good enough. But if I can make them speak in class, I think half of my job is done there. So just a little bit there from my experiences here.
But we want to hear more from you as well.
No, I was trying to, if you don't mind, I'm going to try and read out this quote that I use of Avijit Pathak's in the introduction, where he talks about they call the spirit of sociology. So Avijit Pathak says the teacher is required to convince his or her students that beyond science and common sense lies another possibility, and this is the dilemma of sociology. And sociology is precisely that. Seen this way, sociology is illuminating, emancipatory, challenging, and worth studying. Sociology is not hard if hardness means the affirmation of positivist sciences. Sociology is not soft if softness means common sense. Sociology needs a development of a humanistic temper, profound sensitivity, criticality, and of course, rigorous practice. In fact, teaching sociology becomes meaningful only when the teacher and the taught begin to see the possibility of this alternative orientation to knowledge. So, the way I look at what is there to see, I think there's a lot to learn from the younger people. There's a lot to learn from your classroom. I think for me, one of the biggest things has been how much I've learned in the classroom through our students. Everything that I know about sexuality studies today has been something that I have learned from my classroom. Yeah. So I would say that all of us younger role teachers need to take the classroom not just as a site of teaching, but genuinely, it sounds cliched, but it is a site of learning also. So I'd say to do justice to our discipline of sociology and to keep its spirit alive, a feminist pedagogy has a lot to offer in building both a critical and a empathic temper, in building both a critical and a compassionate temper. And both of you have spoken about how we need to therefore re-examine some of the standards of academic work in the classroom, of how we evaluate, how we understand the students' work, how do we then revise the way we teach. All of it has happened, frankly, Rituparna and Dipali, and I'm sure Joseph will testify to this, that, we all start by thinking when I started teaching early on sociology, I was doing exactly this. The theory is high theory, and I'm going to teach only that. And everything else is outside the classroom. Today, it has gone through a 360 change. That when I'm teaching theory, I teach theory in a very engaged and embodied manner so that it becomes relevant. And relevant to different sections of your classroom. Rather than dividing, one of the major challenges that I've had, I don't know whether you have that in Delhi, Ritpurna, and in Ranchi, is when I teach classical sociological theory, it's a first core paper, and you get a lot of very, very mixed bag students, as we all get. And in today's classroom, you get some very, very articulate, privileged feminists girl. And you also get a not very articulate, not very privileged, but equally committed feminist already in the class. So when you're teaching theory to people who are already tuned to feminism and to those who are not, I've had the classroom becomes a battleground. Okay, it becomes like a place to eat each other up. Yeah. So whether it is a debate on abortion, whether it's a debate on sex work, whether it's a debate, anything that comes, it becomes a space which is like a battleground. And so I find myself really softening and, holding the feminist students a little bit on the side and saying, it's pedagogy is a safe, make it a safe space for yourself. And there is rage, there is anger, but we have to listen to those who are not yet thinking the way you are. And if you really want to bring them around, develop the art of listening, apart from the art of finding your voice. So it's that balance to make the classroom a battleground, yes, but a safe one. Yeah. So that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I would say that the classroom, a feminist classroom, will be dialogical in the sense that it is learning. It's a learning process which is not one-sided. So we have students with different backgrounds, different lived experiences, which in themselves are unique and contribute to the way that we extend our knowledge. I have learned a lot from the classroom about a lot of things. So the dialogical nature of the feminist classroom. And for a teacher in sociology, I would say it's a lifelong experiment in reflexivity. That's what feminist classroom is. That reflexivity enables one to open up spaces which you are not aware of, and open yourself wide to possibilities which you never imagined were possible, and that in a way creates space for students from diverse locations, identities, and backgrounds to belong, and and then theorize, and then to deal with concepts that are developed in sociology from their lived experience and lived background. For that, the teacher needs to be a facilitator who needs to be experimenting with reflexivity without end, without any kind of a full stop. So that's how I would envision a feminist classroom and feminist pedagogical practice.
Let me also just add one thing. We are in the same departments. We talk. Our students talk to us about each other also, and one of the things that I find which they appreciate and respect is the way we show our vulnerabilities. For example, the way Joseph can talk about himself in a vulnerable way, or the way I can speak about myself and my own vulnerabilities with a complete measure on it, of course. But to be able to show that you are vulnerable, I'm constantly telling them that I'm petrified of being called out on various grounds. I joke with them that you'll call me up on this and that. So the point is that if you are vulnerable and you indicate your vulnerability, it does definitely help in the pedagogic process. Pedagogic intimacy, we've seen the worst of it in #MeToo, right? I'm not going there, yeah, but I'm talking about the classroom space, yeah, is a space of intimacy, and it's a space of intimacy which organically has its boundaries, but it is full of potential of connectedness. So, yeah.
And thank you, Dr. Chadha and Dr. Joseph. It has been just wonderful listening to you both. And I think from someone who has just, started with teaching sociology, I think, this book throws a lot of light, or also would be like a very good book to refer to whenever, in doubt or in questions. And so thank you for putting that volume together, and thank you for being with us, joining Doing Sociology this late evening for this discussion. And I really hope that our listeners, our viewers, young teachers, students, like even everybody else who will be listening to it, they'll take a lot from this discussion. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much.